Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, member Consulting Detroit shares his path from graduating into an engineering role right before the financial crisis in 2007 to getting fired from his first job in under a year and taking on debt to pivot and get an MBA in the evening program. Learned some great unique tips for consulting case interviews, how he learned the best practices as a peer coach, and what's in store for him next. Also, just a quick aside, since this is episode number 50, just wanted to take a second and thank all the listeners for sticking with me. This podcast has been super fun and interesting for me, and I hope it's given you some value as well. I'm excited for the next 50 episodes on our way to 100. Enjoy this one. Thanks, guys. Consulting Detroit, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a quick summary of your background.
Yeah. So I started out studying industrial and operations engineering, really leaning into that Six Sigma analytics focused engineering. I thought it'd be a real good practical foundation for myself. And from there, I was more interested in moving into more management work and went back to the University of Michigan to get my MBA. I was really interested in going into consulting. I kind of wanted a diverse set of experiences for my career. And from there, I met one of the big four firms and really enjoyed connecting with folks in their health practice. So I've been a part of that firm for 5 years now. I moved up through the ranks to manager, and then most recently made a transition into a new internal role, which really just kind of fit where I was at in my career, and it's focused in a completely different area, more on helping our teams in the field from a talent perspective. So that's kind of the quick and dirty overview.
Very cool. So I didn't realize that. So yeah, let's start back all the way in undergrad. So why engineering? What was kind of attractive about that to you?
So
wasn't it really? Didn't it make school really hard?
Oh, it was horrible. So coming from Michigan, in the high school, I was a great performer in high school, getting a 4.0. I thought that I could just go to college and put in the same minimal effort and get great degrees. But what I didn't realize was, from Michigan, where I was, a top performer at a small high school, to now competing against the smartest people coming from all kinds of different countries into this one top program. They're studying all day and all night. It was mind blowing and it was terrible. I think I got pretty bad grades the first 2 years in undergrad.
Like under a 2.5, like under a 2.5, like or under a 3 for sure, but
definitely under a 3, and it was probably closer to 2 than 3 for the first 2 years.
Wow.
And it was intended to weed people out. You would get a 40% on an exam, and that would be a B, right? I mean, how demotivating is that? And I think I just convinced myself that was what they were trying to do, and that I could weather the storm.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up learning kind of late in the process to take some courses like the math and science at a local community college and just transfer those credits.
Oh, okay. To boost your GPA a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So improve your GPA, because those are the ones where they're really trying to punish you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those core courses. Once I got through that
reminds me of my undergrad at Williams. They had Bio 101, and I think like 30 or 40% of the class was like pre-med when you start out, and Bio 101 is like notorious. I remember studying more for that class than all the other classes combined and getting a C+ or something like that. And it was just insane what they would do on the exams. It's like you had the right answer, but you didn't like do one little thing, and they'd like slash half the points off, and just brutal grading, crazy curve, like you said, probably, but still probably not as tough as engineering. So I can kind of relate to you. It was definitely a weed out course. So interestingly, so you survived. You actually graduated. Were you put on probation at all for your low GPA?
Thankfully, a lot of the time it's who you know. So through a friend who was in the automotive industry, I got an early internship.
Mm-hmm.
And, at that point I was so early, they didn't really care what my GPA was. But then having that internship experience on my resume, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right? You either need the grades or the experience. And thankfully, a connection helped me get that experience, which then helped me get the next internship despite the low GPA. And then,
and that was freshman summer. You got that right out of the gate.
Exactly. That was freshman summer.
And that was through a friend, you said, right?
Yeah, that was through a connection.
Childhood friend or friend of a friend?
Yeah, exactly. A friend of the family who was in a good position at that company. And, they helped me get that role at, Delphi Automotive is what they were called at the time. So
cool. Did you feel like you learned a lot there? Or no, it's just like the basic internship where you're getting coffee and doing database work?
They gave me big things to do, but, I felt like I didn't quite have all the skills at the time, but it really showed me, what being in the real world would look like, and kind of motivated me to really focus on the things that I would kind of want to study later. So that was helpful.
So having that internship didn't turn you off to engineering. It kind of made you more motivated. It seemed like you were interested, correct? Still?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was interested. They were doing some pretty cool stuff at the time. And, it seemed like there was a lot of opportunity. So at that point, I still felt good about engineering. Yeah.
So you graduated kind of in the peak of the bubble, right?
Oh, God.
When things were still rosy, or maybe there were some cracks in the foundation kind of showing in 2007. Tell me what the recruiting was like. Was it pretty easy to get a job just because you had that internship experience and because it was 2007?
Yeah. So thankfully, with the internship experience, I had the option to return to Ford, where I'd interned. And, I had a good experience there. I had the opportunity to return there. And like you said, right at the peak of the bubble. So recruiting wasn't an issue for me. I enjoyed my experience and didn't feel like I needed to compete too much out of undergrad. So I went there, but unfortunately, right after I started, about 9 months later, the huge downturn happened. And as you probably know, auto was hit harder than almost any, those durable goods, the things that you can wait to buy, right?
Yep.
Everyone just put those on hold. They were hit big time. And almost everyone who was early in that rotational engineering role was let go, including myself. So what a terrible thing to start your career and then immediately be back on the street having to find another job.
So tell me,
that was tough.
So let's talk about that. So, you're only 9 months in at Ford. Somebody pulls you into the office and says, look, things are really bad. Like, we just have to let you go. Sorry. And tell me about that process and kind of what was going through your mind. And then how did you think to kind of start? Did you turn to start building your network? Did you immediately start like contacting everybody? How did you even recover and get a job?
Yeah, it was kind of, surreal, right? Because you just started and you're like, hey, you guys just picked me to join. Like, how bad are you at planning things?
Right.
If you're hiring all these people and then letting us go. So it was just kind of ridiculous. For whatever reason, I didn't feel too devastated. I don't know. Maybe it was just the ignorant state of being a fresh graduate.
Yeah, you're 22, 23. You're like, you can take over the world, right?
Yeah, like, whatever. I'll find something. I'm not worried about it.
Right.
I had actually also interviewed with Goldman in their operations department because I was an operations engineer, but ultimately decided I didn't want to be there when their core focus was investment banking. I didn't really want to be on the operations side. Right?
Got it. Fair.
If I join an organization, I want to be more a part of the core function of what they do.
That's smart.
So, I reached out to some of the folks who I had talked to during undergrad, but then just through kind of good fortune, a recruiter was picking off a lot of the good people coming from the top level companies like Ford and General Motors to one of a growing supplier that had an international base, so they weren't quite as immediately affected.
Yep.
So I got hired into one of these suppliers, kind of like a tier down, and within the area, probably within a couple months. So, that ended up working out, but I was starting to get a little turned off to automotive because when I joined this company, right after I joined, they went through 2 rounds of letting folks go, including another new hire that was hired in the same role as me at the same time. So I had to watch her get let go within a year of being at this company.
You're like, what's going on? You're thinking, what's going on? You're like, is this what the real world's about? Like, you join a company and get fired. You're just,
you talk
so
about
you're
millennials, and the bad taste they have in their mouth and the tough start. I'm like, geez, this is a prime example.
Yeah.
It was rough.
So tell me a little bit about, did you have any sort of debt coming out of school, or were you in the fortune where your parents helped you, like myself, pay for school?
Yeah, I had undergrad debt, but we're
Hmm.
talking like 20 or 30 grand,
Yep.
which in the grand scheme of things seems like not a big deal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, if we talk about MBA down the road, it's just like a drop in the bucket, right? So
Fair.
I had a small amount of debt, which I consider 20 to 30 grand small amount. Maybe some people don't, but
Yeah.
wasn't a huge deal for me from that standpoint.
So, you have this job. Tell me why leave that engineering job? You were kind of getting turned off a little bit by the automotive industry because you saw another round of layoffs as soon as you joined there. What was your thought process of like next steps? How did you start looking at your options?
So all I knew is that I wanted to get away from automotive and get into something else. And I also knew I wanted to get an MBA because I felt like, a lot of the problems that I wanted to tackle were beyond just that narrow focus that you get in engineering, where you need to be specialized and perfectly design something. But let's look at a broad strategy, right? How can we look at M&A opportunities? How can we look at broad business transformations?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely was interested in that. And so I started looking for jobs. Honestly, it wasn't as much about what the job was, but I wanted to get back close to Ann Arbor so I could, work on getting into the MBA program. So I found a job right in Ann Arbor at a small software company as a project manager. And from there, I ended up applying to the evening MBA program. And I think this is interesting maybe for some listeners to say,
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't have a great undergrad MBA, a lot of these really top tier targeted programs like U of M and others have weekend or evening or executive programs
Mm-hmm.
that give you access to a lot of the same companies, but are sometimes easier to get into because the number of applicants are lower because they might be geographically constrained, right?
Interesting. Tell me about that though. Are you given the same access to like on-campus recruiting as the full-time
You
students?
are.
You are.
Are.
Because
Yeah,
I've heard there was
it's
another
amazing.
there was another guest I had on recently. They were at a school similar, that part-time program or the evening program or something like that, and they said they weren't supposed to, but they still hustled enough where they were like invited to go to the drinks, like where there'd be like the on-campus visits and
Okay.
and so
Yeah.
like you should definitely check into that, like whether the evening and or executive MBA has the same access as the full-time I'll call them regular MBA
Yeah.
students,
I'll clarify.
because yeah, that
So
yeah,
we didn't have access for internships because it was assumed that people were working full time.
got
So
it.
you couldn't apply and you couldn't attend events through the university system.
Okay.
However, for full time, it was legitimate, full, same access. Now, some people would be worried, is there like something on my resume that's going to be flagged like this or on my name tag or something, but not really. And ultimately, like this other person mentioned, it comes down to the networking and the hustle. The companies didn't matter. If they liked you and you were at the school and you had the name badge on and you had the resume with University of Michigan at the top, that's all they really cared about.
Got it. Okay. That's
Yeah.
fair. So you kind of were thinking MBA, you want to have a little bit more of a well-rounded background, not just a specialized engineering background. You got back to Ann Arbor because you had kind of targeted that school. What about Ann Arbor? What about Michigan really kind of attracted you there?
For one, they were close to where I was at. And while I had gone there for undergrad, it was a different area of study. So
Yep.
I didn't feel like I had an undergrad in business. I'd just be learning the same things. I really liked kind of where they were headed. They put out a new strategy with 4 pillars. And one of them was focused on positive business. And I felt like that was really forward focused on where we're heading as a society, whether we're looking at, focusing on being better stewards for the environment, building better organizations where people have a purpose in what they do.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like a lot of organizations and the industry was really focused on this. And if this was a pillar for the university, that was something that I thought, both interested me and would be a good, edge when you were going and connecting with companies who were also really starting to focus on these strategies.
Great. So tell me a little bit about that so you start your MBA program, you're kind of dropping in you're dropping your resume right away on these full-time positions because this software company you're working for wasn't kind of a long-term thing for you, right? Or you didn't see it that way? Or tell me about that.
Yeah, they were a good company, and I talked to them about opportunities, but they were at the point where the size didn't really give internal advancement. But I also was really interested in consulting because I wanted to have sort of that dog years of opportunity in a short amount of time, right? So I wanted to see a lot of different business challenges. I also wanted the exposure that you get within consulting to higher level clients than you would if you just went directly into industry, right? So instead of working for a manager or a assistant director or something, you're actually talking to a vice president, even as a senior consultant sometimes. So, I felt like that would be great for my career and also just a lot more fun at that point, and take advantage of getting that MBA. It seemed like consulting was the best to give me those opportunities.
So you had mentioned that the being in the evening program didn't give you access to the internships, but it looks like you did somehow land a summer associate role.
Yep,
So can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
And networked and cheated the system.
Okay. Tell me how you did that specifically, or where your break was.
Yeah. So ultimately, you go to the company's presentation, you have conversations over the phone with consultants and leaders, you get invited to the invite-only drinks, and you just connect with them. And ultimately, they are the ones who decide who they're going to interview. And they tell the school, we're interviewing this person, even though they haven't submitted an application through your school system. And that's kind of motivating. If you've networked so well that they're willing to interview you in spite of the school's sort of norms, then I feel like it's your position to lose ultimately, right?
But then how did you even get onto
do a good job networking?
How did you get onto the docket even? Like the interview scheduling, can you even, this eventually fit you in somehow, or the school was forced to?
Yeah, the school was forced to. So I couldn't apply through the school system, but the school could add me to the official interview list for the day.
Got it.
Through their system, if the company wanted to interview me. So that's the way I did it. And
how did you even say that to the hiring manager? You're like, hey, I can't apply because I'm in an evening program, but it'd be great if you could get me on the list, the interview list. I'd love to interview. How did you do that? In these cocktail hours?
That's kind of
that's an
awkward moment,
it's an awkward ask. Yeah. So tell me how did you broach that?
Yeah, I know we've been dating for a while, but I have these children I haven't told you about.
Exactly.
That's what it felt like. It really did. But we actually had an evening MBA consulting club. And so we learned from our peers kind of what the best way to broach that was. And the best thing was to bring it up early in the conversation to say, hey, I'm an evening MBA, and traditionally we won't do internships, but there's a handful of us who are more looking at a career switch, and so we will be doing it. And so we just prime them and let them know, hey, when it comes time for us to apply, we won't be able to do it through the school system, but we'll still apply via your website. Most companies still make you apply to their website as well as the school system. So I'll still apply to your website, and I'll give you my resume, but you'll need to let the school know to add me to the list. So you kind of work it in early on, so it's not a surprise at the last minute, because then they kind of feel like you're doing something tricky, right? But if you bring it up and you're open and honest about it, at the end of the day, they still like you, then they're already on your side.
Got it.
That's the way to do it.
Fair enough. That's a little tough. It's a little bit of a disadvantage. It's a little bit of an extra little hoop to jump through to get on that interview list. And then on top of that, I'm sure you still have to perform well on top of working full time. And whereas these other MBAs are probably just doing case interviews all day and all night prepping, right? At least I think at Wharton, that's what it was like. I remember seeing these rooms of kids just grilling on case interviews right before the McKinsey, Bain, and BCGs of the world, and the Oliver Wyman's came onto campus, and I was just shaking my head and be like, man, I'm glad I don't have to do that. Anyways, so tell me about that. How was the interview prep for this? Did you have through your other evening MBA colleagues, were you guys kind of doing mock interviews and case interview prep together?
We were. And, you mentioned seeing the other people doing it nonstop, and it kind of brings back some PTSD where, you felt like their full-time job, the people in the full-time program, that was their full-time job, was prepping for this. And we had to do it in those few measly hours left in the week, right? And how are we going to compete with them? So really it was a big uphill battle from that standpoint. But we prepped with one another. We had access to peer coaches who were folks who had interned at these companies and were at the school. So we had the same access to those folks. So, you just sign up as quick as you can and practice with them. So you get really good prep. And then we helped one another. But we also, you could be going through this evening program for 3 or 4 years. So you might get started a year earlier.
Got it.
Some of these other folks, which really was necessary. But people who didn't learn that lesson definitely failed.
Got it. Okay. So you were prepping kind of early on, knowing that consulting was the target here. You did end up landing a summer associate role. Tell me about that. When you got in there and you experienced it over the summer, was it like, this is definitely what I want to do, or was there some doubt?
The reason I decided to take an internship, because it was a different area that I wanted to explore. I was really intrigued by sort of the people side of business and how that would differentiate organizations and sort of the growth in the industry for those services.
Mm-hmm.
And so that led me to apply to Deloitte's human capital, which is really the people side. And they were, really a leader in that space and still are very competitive. And I had a really positive experience there, but I knew if I didn't try it and I jumped right into it full time, I might decide that it's not what I wanted to do. Right. An internship's your only chance to try that if you haven't done it before.
Right.
And so I actually had a pretty good experience with them over the summer. I think they're a great firm. I didn't end up there eventually, but I think it showed me that it was an interesting area, but not what I wanted to do exclusively for the next 3, 4, 10 years, whatever.
Did you get
career?
Did you get a return offer from that summer?
So that was kind of a tough situation because, in talking to my counselor and folks at that company, I sort of made it clear that this wasn't something I wanted to go back into. And so I talked to them. I said, hey, can I come back into another group, right? Into the strategy practice or the S&O practice? And the answer that I was told was, not really. We've allocated all the slots, and also you didn't really network with them during the recruiting season, so they don't know who you are. And so that wasn't really well received.
Yeah, which makes sense.
They didn't even end up even extending an offer to me because I didn't want to lie. I didn't want to be like, I'm excited. I want to do this. And then try to trick them and transfer.
Totally
later.
Get it.
It didn't seem like the best path.
Yeah, I get it. But so did you use that same explanation you just gave me now? Is that kind of what you went to market with when you tried to go back for full-time recruiting? Just telling them straight up, saying, look, I didn't want to be in the people side of the organization design or whatever they call it, type of practice.
Exactly. That was my pitch. It was good experience. It was something that I can still use, right? When I'm talking to clients and go into market, but it's not what I want to do exclusively, right? I'm happy to do it as, a third of my projects maybe, but I don't want to only be doing that for, the next 4 or 5 years in my career in consulting or however much time I spend.
So you're in the full-time,
that was my pitch.
So you're in the full-time program. Did you quit your full-time job to take the summer associate role?
Yeah, that was scary because I had a mortgage and I had a kid at the time.
Because I'm thinking about this. It's got to be a trickier. It's got to be a trickier maneuver here, where you're basically quitting your full-time job. You're taking on this. At least it's a paid summer associate role, right? But it's still you don't know if you're going to get the full-time offer. Then you do the bold thing of saying, "Well, no, I'm not really interested in this. Sorry." And they say, "Well, don't let the door hit you on the way out." We're not. There's no other seats for you. It's either here or nothing. And so, tell me how you kind of came out of that. What was it like in the final few weeks of that summer associate role at Deloitte? And had you, as soon as you knew it wasn't for you, had you been networking like that whole summer to try and kind of start getting into full-time processes?
One regret that I have is that I didn't do a ton of networking over the course of the summer. And so that's one thing that I would say. If you're ever unsure during your internship, definitely continue networking with other firms throughout the course of the summer. And and I'll tell you why more later because, or we can jump into it now. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
As I was leaving Deloitte, I felt like I started making those connections and it seemed kind of late in the game. And the responses were sort of hit or miss, right? And I didn't know if people weren't buying the story or if they already sort of had people they had hired all the interns they needed and they didn't need to recruit full time. So it was kind of hit or miss. And
Yeah, I'm surprised you weren't more fearful. Kind of in essence, you kind of turned down Deloitte because they had you slotted for a specific area. You kind of showed your cards that it wasn't that interesting to you, which personally, as if I was a career coach at the time, I would have probably told you to say, hey, just put your head down, accept it, but continue to talk and build your network outside of this. And then use that same story of like, hey, I'm here, I like it, maybe do a year there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's probably what I would, because the route you took of saying, well, no, guys, I really don't want to do this, all the time and blah, 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 was kind of bold and risky in the sense that, like you said, you were getting kind of not as much traction as you had maybe anticipated. The story, people have to buy the story. They're kind of thinking, is this a red flag? He didn't get a return offer. You know what I mean? There's a lot of potential things that could be roadblocks. So tell me how you overcame those and what was the gap? Were you unemployed for a while, or how did you deal with that?
Yeah. So I was essentially now full-time school, right?
Yep.
And that was kind of scary because I had to take out loans to cover my fixed costs as well as the school now. So unlike some of the full-time MBAs who were eligible for scholarship because they applied through full-time and they could get additional financial aid, I had to kind of take on more private loans at higher interest just to cover those costs. But I just believed it'd be for a fixed amount of time, right? And so I immediately started connecting with some of the other firms, which were other big fours, and then the big three MBB that I had networked with during the internship season. And a couple of those, so two of them, one big four and then McKinsey, were the ones that I ended up getting an interview for, right? And so thankfully I got 2 hits out of maybe 4 or 5 that I had tried to reconnect with. And so it was a little scary for a while, and there was kind of silence on some of those firms. But fortunately a few of them remembered me, enjoyed the connection, and felt like it was worth exploring. So
tell me about that recruiting process. So you were kind of in the same bucket as the people coming out of summer associate role, like they're trying to fill a few extra seats, or how did that work?
Yeah. So fortunately, a few of the firms set aside some roles for full-time recruiting.
Okay.
Now, one thing that I will mention, because I help recruit on campus now for MBAs for my firm, we get there's a lot more firms that are focusing exclusively on intern only. So, for people who are listening, that's a trend that we're seeing. And you might have already heard this from others too, but I just figured I would mention that.
There's less slots, you mean? There's less slots, like it's basically almost exclusively hired out of the internship class. Almost all the seats are filled. Correct?
It's becoming that way, especially for consulting, I've noticed.
Right.
So some of the bigger firms are trending that way, and it's becoming increasingly difficult if you didn't get an internship or you're not accepting your return offer to make a move over.
So tell me how you did it. Tell me about the actual interviews themselves.
Yeah. So, the McKinsey one went well. I made it through, the first or second rounds and into the final rounds. I was in the Detroit office interviewing with them, and I really liked the experience. And I later found out they only had one slot, and it was myself and one other finalist. And at the end of the day, I found out that this individual had done like an excellent job of networking over the entire summer, made some connections, visited with some of the partners in the office, and it was almost like her spot to lose. Assuming that she interviewed well and was competitive, they kind of knew more about her. They were comfortable with her, and I was like, well, if this guy just really blows it out of the water, and is like clearly the best person we've ever seen, well, maybe we'll consider it, right? And so, that showed me that, whoops, I had really screwed up by not maintaining those connections over the summer just in case this wasn't what it panned out to be. But I just didn't get a lot of career coaching on that at the time.
I wonder, all the listeners out there, if they, at this point, almost 50 episodes in, this actually might be the 50th episode, whether they actually have seen the pattern of how ridiculously important networking is. It's almost like it's a broken record. So everyone out there, please, this is no joke. This is your future. Like, you have to talk to people. You have to get comfortable talking to people. You can't just sit by idly and hoping that you interview well. You're just going to get into those first rounds just by the strength of your resume. It's incredibly naive. And the sooner you learn that lesson, that it's about who you know and the relationships you build, the faster you'll move up in your career. So anyways, I just little PSA, because it's just been it's so ridiculous how almost every single guest says the exact same thing. So I just wanted to make sure to call that out. So you kind of am I looking at your background correctly to thinking you actually became a peer coach to kind of bridge the gap a little bit? An MBA peer coach?
Yeah. So I had benefited a lot from the peer coaches while I was preparing for consulting interviews.
Yep.
And I learned a lot. And so that was a good little part-time job, 10, 12 bucks an hour, just 10, 15 hours a week.
Surprised they pay you that low.
I really enjoyed doing.
I can't believe they pay you that little, but okay, continue.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways.
It was like table scraps, but I was probably signing up for more slots than anyone.
The WSO mentor program seems like we pay you guys, bank compared to that. Come on.
That's right.
Anyway, so yeah.
This was the university.
Yeah, fair enough.
The university was paying us, and we were still students at the time, so I can sort of understand it. But it's also sort of expected that you give back to the next class, right?
Fair.
And the previous class had helped you, so now it's your turn to give back. So we were getting paid something, which was great. It's better than nothing. And we were giving back. And I really enjoyed coaching students. But what I found was I was still interviewing at that time.
Yeah.
While I was a peer coach, I was learning a ton.
It was helping you.
From the first year students. I'm like, wow, that guy, I love how he created this table to organize his information as he checks boxes and loved his framework.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would, sort of absorb all of the best things that they had, help other students.
You were getting paid. You were getting paid and you were learning as you went. That's awesome.
Learning.
Yeah.
I mean, I was mostly helping them, but I was also learning, right? Because I was seeing 20 or 30 different students, over the course of that period and kind of taking all of what was the best.
Yep.
Sharing that with others, sharing what I had learned. But that ultimately ended up helping me during my interviews as well. And there are a few things that really stood out to me from that experience.
Sure.
And what I would say is everyone thinks, you have to learn the Victor Chang frameworks and memorize all these frameworks and be good at math. But the number one differentiator for folks who are preparing for consulting cases is that the secret for the cases is all about fit and how you interact with the individual during that session and how they feel coming out of it. That feeling that they're left with, like, wow, that was a really collaborative experience. I feel like I was simulating working on a mini engagement with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that successfully, everyone's doing the math. Everyone's framework is good, but if you can do that, those are the people who go from great to offer.
How do you feel like? How do you do that? How do you make it feel more collaborative? Is there certain tips you could give in terms of how to structure the case in such a way to make it more collaborative? I think BCG is different from McKinsey in terms of how much it's led by the actual interviewee, but any specific kind of guidance in terms of how to do that?
So I'll give two very tactical things that people can do.
Sure.
And happy to talk with them more about others. But one would be just how you position yourself and position the papers that you're writing on. So don't try to sit across from them in sort of an oppositional way. If you can position yourself to sit sort of, adjacent to them, right? So that it's almost like you're working with them. And then if you can't do that, at a minimum, when you're describing your framework or things that you're solving, turn your paper and face it to them and use your pen to kind of point at and search different things so that you're really kind of working on it together with them and you're engaging them in that. So that would be one.
I love that.
The other thing I would recommend would be during the case, don't just kind of move to the next thing, sort of have a mid-level synthesis. So if you see a number and it's kind of abnormally large, have some sort of interesting reaction to that. Be like, wow, that's really huge. It really seems like we're trending in a positive way for this client. If what I'm looking at is correct, or kind of bring it back to reality. Be like, wow, we're only charging $20 a night and this is a hotel. Like, well, it doesn't seem really realistic, but let's keep pushing forward into this case and see what we discover, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you kind of have those engaging mid-level synthesis comments, it kind of keeps them flowing and makes it more conversational rather than just kind of focusing tactically on moving through your framework, moving to the next thing, and only focusing on the final solution.
Right. It's not about getting to the answer. It's about the entire collaborative process of working together, almost more. And making that experience as enjoyable and as memorable and demonstrating that you have the right thought process, kind of, I guess.
That sounds like a movie trailer. It wasn't about the destination, but the journey and the friends they made along the way.
Exactly,
Right? So,
exactly. So, okay, so you picked up a lot of kind of the best tactics doing this MBA peer coach, getting paid peanuts for it, but hey, it seemed like it helped you. You got into more processes. So obviously the McKinsey thing didn't work out. You get it to a Big Four, you kind of have another set of interviews. Tell me about those and what you think made the difference. Was it just having that extra bit of experience?
so a lot of it came down to, number one, the networking and having built really good relationships with the folks on the ground.
Yeah.
And so I think that helped with the first round, right? But then for the final round, they really bring folks from all the schools and try to make it more of a meritocracy.
Yep.
It's not like a certain number of folks from each school. It's really whoever's the best. And I appreciated that. So definitely the case prep helped me. The case that I faced ended up being a little bit less numbers based and kind of more of a project management simulation case, which was interesting. And then the other piece was a group case where you're with a group of folks trying to solve a problem.
Tell me about that. And what's the strategy there? Because that's super intimidating.
That's very intimidating, but I think it's really essential. And now that I'm on the other side as an interviewer, I see it's one of the most valuable. If I had a company, I would make sure that I did this because everyone looks good one-on-one. Suddenly in a group format, everyone's trying to be a leader. Everyone's trying to show they're intelligent. And, how are they handling this conflict? So the tactics for that are definitely show that you're a leader, but then make sure that you're inclusive, right? If you see someone not speaking up, say, hey, we'd love to get your opinion on this. Leverage things about them to say, hey, I remember last night you told me that you spent some time in IT. I'd love your view on the technology side of this case that we're looking at.
Does everyone start speaking over each other in those group settings? Like, isn't that awkward?
Yeah,
like trying to be a leader?
It certainly can be. Yeah. And so, someone who's like that can bring the whole team down and then everyone looks bad. So,
but I would think, think you'd want to at least from my perspective, if I was in that group, my personality would be such that I could be a leader. If everyone was quiet, I could step up, but I wouldn't want to force it if someone was being a bull in that case, because it could make you look really bad, and you start looking, like you said, like similar to that person who won't stop talking or whatnot. But I don't know, maybe people have enough self-introspection at that level where they understand they shouldn't be dominating the conversation all the time and be inclusive.
Yeah,
but
it's tough. You have to find a way to get your voice in there, right? To say, hey, I'm really interested in what you presented. However, have you considered these other components, which I don't feel like we've looked at to date? So you kind of acknowledge them. You say that you're interested in what they're doing, but then you kind of bring in some other pieces to kind of get your voice in there.
Yeah.
And if you're actually maybe more on the correct path, you don't need to fight with them. The observers will still see that you're willing to step in. But then, how do you compromise? Maybe you can say, well, let's include both of our solutions with maybe some pros and cons for our client that we're presenting to consider.
Right.
Or, what other unique approaches can we take to this so that we're not fighting, but we're all getting our voices heard, right?
Fair. Okay. So tell me about your path a little bit at one of the Big Four. Tell me about how you've kind of progressed there from, senior consultant all the way up through director now, or assistant director.
Yeah. So it's, I was focused on one of the sectors, which was healthcare. That was a sector I was really interested in just because of the growth and also the challenges they had. I mean, think about last time you went to a doctor, how many times you filled out the same form, the lack of consumer, interest. So they don't really care who you are. You don't feel like you have any choice in terms of shopping around, right? So many opportunities, so many different parties. I'm like, I was just drawn in and salivating at this huge challenge that healthcare presented, but also the purpose, right? The ultimate product, the healthy person. So that's something that was motivating. And so I got to do a variety of projects. I did some strategy work. I did some kind of operations and process improvement, some organization transformation, standing up different org structures and roles and profiles, change management, outsourcing of a complete set of administrative processes to another vendor, which was, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of work that was going. So, I thought that was just wonderful for me to get that broad variety of experiences.
What was the most surprising when you joined? Like when you first joined, was there a steep learning curve at all?
Yeah, there was, because I hadn't really focused on health coming in.
Yeah.
And so, I needed to kind of ramp up. I knew a lot of the language because I'm married to a nurse, so that really helped.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
I had the passion. I knew a lot of the language, but there was definitely a learning curve coming up. But what I found was if you could connect well with clients and they enjoyed working with you and you knew enough of the sector language and challenges, that was what they cared about was that you were a good team member, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were someone that they enjoyed working with. The same thing internally is if you were a good, engaging team member, that carried a lot more weight than just your Excel skills or how well you could, put together slides or things. They would tolerate, some of those things that you needed to grow in if you were someone who was just good to work with. And it seems like common sense, but that skill set of being collaborative, being positive, and being willing to take on things and help other people out went a really long way.
So tell me a little bit about your latest transition and kind of what's up for you next.
Yeah. So I have a handful of children, and
How many?
my spouse.
How many?
4.
4. Oh, you beat me. I'm at 3. Although I have 3 in the
so-
last 4 years, so I'm pretty much drowning over here. I'm not gonna lie.
Yep. I can hear the bags under your eyes.
Yeah.
So 4 kids, and it was when that 4th kid came around, and at the same time, my spouse was interested in advancing her career to get a master's in nursing and continuing to work part-time, and I felt like it was a great opportunity to kind of give back, and she invested a lot in me and my career.
Yeah.
And it was a great opportunity for me to take a different path for a period of time and invest in her. And I was very grateful that the firm I joined has been embracing different career pathways.
Yep.
So it's not just up and out, and they're becoming more and more open about that on, the all hands calls, on how we coach our partners to encourage those things. So there were some internal positions, and I just spent maybe a year and a half searching for the right one and found one that was really interesting to me, focused on helping our teams in the field and our leaders and even some of our individuals with, operating at their best and what a high performing team looks like. So we have frameworks that we roll out that we help them with. We do some coaching with them. We measure engagement levels and help our leaders kind of mitigate some challenges and also celebrate where they're doing really well. And I think it's something that, will help the firm differentiate itself, right?
Yeah.
When you're going, if you have a good team, people who work well together, right? That's going to come through to the client. Wow, these people really like working together.
Yeah.
We can tell that, right?
Yeah.
And we like to work with them because of that. We want to buy more from them.
Mm-hmm.
And this team sticks around. It's not like they're rolling people off all the time. It's like people seem to like to stick around with each other, right?
Yeah.
So these are things that I experienced and I felt. And so, finding that right internal role for me was really meaningful. And the fact that, this particular firm embraced that path.
So
And
when
I
you
talked
say
to my counselor about it,
when you say
my
transition,
counseling family leader. Yeah.
so when you said transition, it's almost like you mean like not up and out. It's almost like up and to the right, or to a role where you're not working the 60-hour weeks or the 70-hour weeks. It's a more reasonable kind of schedule, so you can help at home. Is that the thought process?
That's a perfect explanation. So it was, I moved up to the manager rank, and then I moved right into an internal rank that's similar or equivalent.
Yeah.
But it gives me more of that flexibility. I still probably travel 10 or 20% of the time.
Okay.
But overall, I'm able to work remotely or from the office.
Great.
And spend a lot more time being present at home, which was just a real necessity for me at this point in my career.
How old are your kids? Do you mind if I ask?
Oh, no problem. So they're 9, 7, 5, and 2.
Oh my gosh, dude. God bless you.
Yeah.
9 to 2.
That's
You guys
exciting,
stretched it out. Well, 7 years. No, that's pretty fast. That's pretty fast for 4. So, wow, you guys. Yeah, you still have the 2-year-old. So, well, you're almost out of diapers. You're almost out. Anyways, well, it's been really great. What's next for you? I assume you just started this role, so this is probably the plan for the foreseeable future. A couple of years here, and then we'll see. Is that the thought process?
Yeah. So I like this role. It has the option for long-term progression internally. It's not as accelerated of a path, but I feel like there's a lot that I can learn. And in fact, when I was applying for this role, a partner in client service mentioned to me, he said, some of the things that you'll be doing internally, we've started doing for our clients as well. So if you ever wanted to come back to client service, it's not like you'd have lost all your skill sets or anything. We'd welcome you with open arms. And in fact, there's a demand for some of these services.
Right.
So that was encouraging. But I'm not in a race to head back that direction. I want to really pursue this and enjoy this time and make a big impact in the role that I'm in.
For sure.
So kind of grateful for that. And that's a near long-term goal.
This has been great. Before we call it, any advice you'd give to kind of the younger professionals, either pre-MBA or post-MBA, or maybe getting their MBA now? Anything you kind of look back on and say, I wish I'd done this differently, or advice you'd give?
Yeah, I would say if you can, take that full-time MBA experience. If you came out of undergrad and you're going into a company and you're even thinking about doing the MBA, I would say embrace that full-time MBA program. It's such a fun time in your life. That 1 year where I was able to focus full-time, I felt like I learned a lot. I made a ton of connections. And the other thing I would say would be join as many of the clubs and groups that you can, and do just a ton of networking. I know we talked about networking, but I would say, those relationships go a really, really long way, and those connections last a long time. And I did more of that in my MBA than I did in undergrad, even though I was working during a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it paid dividends for me, and it continues to do so. So just keep networking, never stop. Once you're in the firm, keep doing it, keep meeting with people. And then if you're even considering it, go ahead and make the plunge for that full-time MBA. It's a lot of fun, and you won't regret it, even with the debt.
Even with the debt. We'll leave it there. But anyways, thanks so much for joining us. And and if any of you guys want to connect, it's Consulting Detroit is the username. So thanks so much, man. And we'll be in touch. And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.